News Talk 640 WFNC. We have the pleasure of having in studio right now retired General Dan Mcneill, former commander of the 82nd Airborne Division. Oh, look, sir, I can just go on and on. Just give us the highlight of the background of some of the folks that you commanded before going to Afghanistan.
I was fortunate to have commanded the 82nd Airborne Division for a few years, and then 18th Airborne Corps, off to Afghanistan with 18th Airborne Corps headquarters, back down to Atlanta, U.S. Army Forces Command, and out of that back into Afghanistan again as the NATO commander of ISAF.
You know, and I've known you for many, many years. I have interviewed you on countless occasions, and I always bring this up when I see you. The first thing out of your mouth when I ask you a question is, how is your son?
He's doing well, and Charlotte seems to fit. He and his family nice, and in fact, Maureen and I last week were off with our two granddaughters without their parents for a few days in the western part of the state for their spring break, and it was great fun for us all.
And, you know, you used to ask me the same thing about my son, Gilbert Jr.
And I would ask it again today.
Yeah, he's 44 years old and doing his thing. And you had a bout with some cancer as well?
I did.
Yeah, and how are you doing?
I'm doing well, yeah.
The course of your command has taken you around the world. You were the commander who led our soldiers into Afghanistan after the 9/11 attack and in the search for Osama bin Laden. Just talk about that, because we're in a kind of a similar situation now with Iran, and I know you don't know all the particulars about the planning for that attack, but I've heard speculation. I've heard reports that members of the 82nd Airborne Division are positioned to head into Iran. That just doesn't happen overnight. Talk about the planning that's needed when you're talking about sending troops anywhere.
Well, I would take your first question first, and I would remind you I didn't go into Afghanistan by myself. I had a lot of good citizens with me, and they've all done quite well in life, and I'd like to point that out. And we were there in the early days. It was a very difficult challenge. And both times I was in Afghanistan, I think a significant point, if you want to compare with what things might be like in Iran, one of our biggest challenges, if not the biggest challenge, was the friction that occurred between various tribes. I for some reason, when I was talking to President Karzai in those days, he never liked me to talk of the term of ethnic friction, but that's what it was. But so that made things very difficult to get a fast pace of progress in Afghanistan. I believe Iran could be said to be a little bit different. I think they have some more homogeneity within their culture. I think the preponderance of people there are of the Shia faith. And my experience in Afghanistan, and I think some of it would translate into Iraq, is that when they consider what's important to them, the people first go to faith, then family, and then region, community, or something before they ever consider national considerations. It was also a very frustrating thing in Afghanistan. So the fact that there may be units, and I don't have firsthand knowledge. What I know, I've read mostly in the newspapers, but I seem to recall 2 or 3 weeks ago, I read that the 82nd headquarters, or maybe one of its brigade, had been diverted away from routine training at a combat training center.
Right, they were down the box in Louisiana,
Mm-hmm.
and the headquarters company was taken out of that, and that's normally your planning area. That's where you would find the generals. That's where you would find the commanders of a unit in headquarters company. I was in 35th headquarters company, so I know what the planning is involved with when you're sending your S3 shop or your S2 or S1 in order to prepare, to put an operation order together in order to get ready to go somewhere. And the 82nd, wheels up anywhere in the world in 18 hours, and that's still the case now that even you're gone.
Well, the 18-hour thing has rolled over into what's called the Global Response Force, or something similar to that term. And so maybe it's not 18 hours, but you have to remember that the country is in a scrape you can bet with reasonable certainty that part of the force will come from Fort Bragg, whether it's a conventional force, whether it's an unconventional force, or whether it's a really dark side unit. You can bet on that.
Well, you have
sure.
an awful lot of
But
experts.
let me point out one thing,
Sure.
Gilbert, that pulling a unit out of the box is not exactly without precedent. I think back to when we were going into the first Gulf War. I was a G3 of the 82nd. We had a brigade headquarters, and one of its battalions, to be specific, was the 3rd Brigade, and the battalion was 2505, commanded by Ray Drummond, out at Fort Chaffee, which at that time was the Combat Training Center for Dismounted Forces. Now it's Fort Polk. And the consideration was we were all getting down to the personnel holding facility at Fort Bragg, and the decision was, what are we going to do about the 3rd Brigade? And from high, it was said, leave them alone, they're going to finish out this training. But before we had begun deployment significantly into the first Gulf War, we had to recall them. So having someone somewhere and bringing them back for deployment to a combat theater is not unprecedented in the 82nd.
Yeah, but it raises your eyebrows when you have world events going on like it is. And for those who are unfamiliar with the term "the box," that's a training area and I was impressed with it when we took Channel 5 down there and did a story. I thought I was in Afghanistan in terms of the configuration. Describe that and what the type of training is.
It's as near to combat as you can possibly get and remain bloodless. The advent of all kinds of internet technology, of lasers and things along those lines, you can replicate some significant dimensions of actual combat. So when a unit is in the box, as you and I know it to be, at Fort Polk, or for that matter, at the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, it's you slew the line. This is how you should behave in combat. And if you deviate, then that becomes the stuff of after-African reviews. Okay, why did you make this decision? Why did you put that unit there? And in the end, so, would there have been a better way of something? So it's when you're there, it is top-of-the-line training. It's really serious business. When you are called back before the end of that too should be considered very serious.
And, there were Afghan players there who spoke the language. I was impressed with the way it was set up. So in a training scenario, trying to emulate what it would be like to meet the Aman of a tribe or whatever it might be, to sit down and have tea or coffee with them and try to win the hearts and minds, I guess is the best way to describe it, was very realistic.
Yes.
And I watched those encounters with the commanders who were taking their soldiers through there. And the problem with these scenarios, especially in Afghanistan and in Iraq as well, I've been to both locations. I think I was in Afghanistan at one location, and I was in Bagram. No, you were in Bagram,
Correct.
And I was in the other, Kandahar.
Yeah.
So we never crossed paths over there. But when you're in that environment, it was difficult to determine who was friendly and who was not because of the infighting that you were talking about. But you say that might be different in Iran.
I think that it is likely that the people of Iran are more galvanized than the people we found in Afghanistan. I have no certainty of that, but it appears to me that they're likely a larger group that are galvanized.
When you and I were talking about this, we've been talking a week or two about you coming on the show and discussing this, and we're only going to talk about the things you know, and that's what we can do. But an awful lot of being in that region and dealing with folks who are fighting, in many cases, what are described as holy wars. This country is going to be 250 years old. We are dealing with countries that have been fighting each other for thousands of years over religious and territorial disputes. The whole reason we went into Iran was because they cut off Kuwait. And that's a major port that Iran believed that was our territory. We're going to win it back. We're going to take it back. I remember that war, and I remember going there, and I remember seeing members from our special forces on the road. It was called the Road to Death, where the Iraqis stole buses, private vehicles, when they knew that the 82nd or the America was coming. And the A-10s and F-16s came in and sealed them off as they stole those vehicles to try to get back to Iraq. And I remember seeing bodies still in vehicles, burned from beyond recognition because of the devastation that was brought to them by U.S. forces. And I remember bumping into a Special Forces soldier who said, "I've seen war, but I've never seen war like this." Your take on that? And the Iraqi army that we thought was going to be tough to fight really was crumbling by the time we came there. And we beat that war pretty quickly.
Well, in retrospect, we all believed that there was an Iraqi army that had significant capability. That appears not to have been the case. They had a lot of equipment, make no mistake about that, but they lacked the main ingredient of American soldier. They did not have the heart to fight for something they believed in.
Well,
I think where you're going with this, I would simply offer that I believe it's a different situation in Iran.
That's exactly where I'm going with this. And the will to fight, the heart to fight, and to fight to the death, and to fight for a cause that is deep in your heart, be it religious or whatever it might be, is a totally different thing. I think so far we've underestimated what Iraq's capability is. And if we go back to the Shah of Iran in 1979 when the hostages were taken, more than 50 years of animosity from that country against America, and enough time to build munitions, store munitions, develop new drone technology, and store it in mountains and locations that are already targeting places like we've seen unleashed after the Ayatollah was killed. It should not have been a surprise to anyone. It's surprising to you what's happening now.
I would point out one thing, and you see it often in news reports these days. People like to refer to the tipping point as being 1979, and I've got a slightly different view. I think the tipping point actually goes back to about 1953, when decisions by a coalition of the United States and the Brits decided to set the conditions to remove a dude who was called prime minister in that country, and after the removal, that really set the conditions for the Shah eventually down the road to take control of that country. I don't think that ever set well with the people in that country, and I believe that contributed greatly to the anti-American feeling, and I don't believe it's limited just to Americans. I suspect they feel the same way about the British.
Well, and I think in any of the Arabic countries that are supporting bases and places that we have munitions to be able to attack from close range are also targeted, and I don't think that the president anticipated that the response from Iran would be what it is in terms of targeting those locations where U.S. forces are.
I don't know that I have sufficient information to say what the president was thinking or not thinking. I don't know that I have read any national leader, to include some in the Middle East, who had great problems with the assassinations of some of the leadership in Iran. I think most people think it's helpful to eliminate those hardliners. I believe most countries agree that it is helpful to eliminate a country that's so tyrannical as that country, that it's helpful to eliminate their ability to produce fissionable weapons that could be used not only in that region, but maybe used even further away than that.
Sir, let me say this, and you know this as well. Maybe is always the question. There were supposed to be weapons of mass destruction in Iran, and that was the premise from which in Iraq, right? And that was the premise from which we sent a large amount of forces there. There was of course, Osama bin Laden and the attack on America and the 9/11 attack, and reasons to go after Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, and we sent massive forces there, and we stayed in America's longest war. there. If you think about World War II or World War I and how short those conflicts were in comparison to Afghanistan, or even in Vietnam, at what point do we as Americans learn the lessons from Vietnam, learn the lessons from Afghanistan, that we can't be the world's police force? And correct me if I'm wrong, sir. I mean, you're a 4-star general, retired. But as a lieutenant, young Ranger lieutenant, gun-ho kind of guy, looking at being proud of our country and serving, we are good at making sure that America is safe. We have the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. We had friends to Canada. We weren't really too concerned about Mexico. So the fact of our geological location it was part of the defense, but we had strong soldiers and airmen and Marines, all of our service members, dead set on making sure that America is safe. You've been in places, I've been in places, and I described the other day being in Charles de Gaulle Airport, and the whistles were blown, and all of a sudden someone left a bag in the middle of the airport. The bomb squad came in. I was with the TV crew, and everyone stood back, and they blew that bag up, and then they blew the whistles, and everybody went about their own day. If that would have happened at RDU, it would have been the lead story. No one thought about that. And the only reason I bring that up is because we, as a country, are not looking up at the sky at a tomahawk falling down on us because of who we are and the defense that we have. And so when we become offensive with what we're doing for regime change or for oil or for whatever it is, we look like the bad guy in the picture. Not the defenders of democracy. And for me, I have a problem with that. And I want to be proud of our country. But it's hard for me to watch what's going on right now. How about for you? As a former commanding officer who led troops into battle, do you have a problem with what you see happening now?
That's a different issue entirely. And let me go back and make one point of something you said. You were indeed a fine signal officer and gung-ho. 4 stars are gung-ho, too. As are 3 stars, as are 2 stars, there's a 1 star. That's not an extraordinary thing. But when you are given legal orders, you have a duty to either follow those orders or put your rank on the table and move on to something else.
But look, we've had admirals, we've had generals who have done exactly that, that's saying they can't continue to bomb and double tap boats in the Caribbean without proof that they have drugs or they propose some immediate threat to our country. And so we've had admirals that have resigned because of that. So at what point do you say these orders are not legal and we've got, as you said, you've got to put your career on the line, and some folks aren't doing that now.
I think that you would do better by finding one of those individuals and putting that question to them and exactly what motivated them to change such a dramatic way in life. Thus far in what's going on in terms of the United States, applying elements of power, especially the military element, I don't think I have seen anything that is unlawful. And if it were, I would have to presume that our members of Congress and others would say, stop, we're not going to underwrite this, you're not going to do this, this is wrong. I have read opinion pieces of people who claim that shooting boats that are transporting drugs is a violation of the law of armed conflict. I will leave that to the lawyers to decide. It is, I don't know that's something I necessarily would have given advice to any leader, civilian leader in the United States that, yeah, we ought to do this. That's not the kind of advice I would give. And to begin with, when you start to apply power, make it mean something. You're now close to having used up all the tools you have. And I'm not sure that a cigar boat, which appears that most of them are fast-running small boats, that's the kind of target I would give advice to the senior leaders of the United States of America. Hey, you ought to shoot this.
Well, one step even beyond that, we have a Secretary of Defense who was a commentator like me, and he served in both conflicts, but not at the level that you did. Would you have problems taking orders from someone without the experience that's needed? I mean, General Austin, for example, was outstanding general. And as you said, it's gone through the
and a
paces.
good Secretary of Defense you should have.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I remember when we had the accident at Pope Air Force Base. That was his unit that was on the rank there. That I interviewed him. He was a colonel at the time.
Yeah.
And
But it was actually a 1st Brigade unit. He was the 3rd Brigade.
He was
commander.
3rd Brigade. Yeah. Yes, and so to have people who have experienced that, who have experienced combat at the planning level that you guys have is important. I think in the leadership and making sure that you have the spirit de corps that's needed to lead. Not just say big words and say them hard and say them loud and that type of thing, but people have confidence in you because they know your background and your experience level. And I think that's what you experienced in Afghanistan and leading soldiers in there. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Well, I think your premise of your comment has to do with the present Secretary of Defense, and there are some political dimensions to comment on that. I'll just remind you that you took an oath, the same one that I took, and it appears this Secretary of Defense went through all the wickets to get in his job. And it appears that the President of the United States has confidence in his ability and what advice he might give. I don't think it's right for me to say, no, that was all wrong.
Look, and sir, we discussed that before you came on, that I don't want you to answer any questions that you don't feel comfortable answering, but I appreciate your honesty and candor in talking about a situation right now where we have the potential for boots on the ground from soldiers in this area to leave and head into combat once again. You've done that with our soldiers. Some did not come back. I mean, and that is the premise of war. We understand that.
Sad for the families, nonetheless.
Absolutely. And so the question is, I'm not posing this question to you, it's a rhetorical question, is the fact that are we at a point where we need to send boots on the ground? And just giving your knowledge of that area and the size of Iran, the population, 90 million individuals strong, that is a totally different environment than Afghanistan and Iran. And Afghanistan gave us a fit because of what you were talking about there. If you were in a position to give any advice to me, not the president or anyone else, would you say I should go to Iran with boots on the ground?
I would first ask, what are your intentions? What do you posit is a end state? How do you want this all to play out? There have been, obviously, from the political side of the government, not necessarily the military side, there have been conflicting statements about here's what we intend to achieve. And I am not sure I can tell you this is what I think we're trying to achieve. I've heard the statement, we're going to eliminate their ability to produce a fissionable weapon, okay? Do we need boots on the ground to do that? I don't know. I don't have enough information on the intel picture to say, yeah, we need boots on the ground or we don't need boots on the ground.
Well, but sir, you would agree that any conflict you can't win with aerial assaults. At some point, if the win is to bring the enemy to an end, like in Germany or whatever it might be, there has to be boots on the ground in order for you to get to that point. You just can't bomb someone into submission.
That's very true. And there were those who believed that in the Second World War that we could bring the Nazi regime to an end from the air. That proved not to be the case. Many Allied units had to cross the Rhine, had to go as far as Berlin. I think I remember reading in a historical report that the Russians, in their final assault on Berlin, lined 1,000 artillery pieces hub to hub and fired a salvo at one time. Can you imagine the noise?
Wow.
Stuff like that. So there was obviously a perceived need to do things along those lines, that bombing had been helpful to shape the battlefield, but it did not eliminate the threat.
Well, sir, man, I could talk to you for 3 hours. I'm glad we've had this conversation here. And again, I appreciate your candor in talking about that. I want to let you make whatever point you want to make before we leave here.
I want to remind people, and I'm sure because this community is the way it is, we do not need a whole lot of reminding. But if units leave Fort Bragg, their families typically stay back. I think there are about 8,000 sets of family quarters associated with Fort Bragg, and I suspect there's somewhere between 22 and 25,000 families, military families at Fort Bragg. Help them out if there are deployments. You know, you can always take a kid to their soccer match to spare the parent and give the parent some time to do. But just remember, the preponderance of these families are not living in the confines of Fort Bragg. They are living in your communities.
Well, when I stand outside my front door, one of the brigade commanders for the 82nd Airborne Division lives there. One of the majors who is involved with the 82nd lives in front of me, and one of the NCOs is off to my right. I cut their grass for them when they're gone.
God bless you.
And that's what we do. And I told the colonel, I said, as his wife came out and said, "What are you doing, Gilbert? He's here." I said, "I don't have to wait for you to become a veteran to say thank you for your service." And I think that's the point. You don't have to wait for these soldiers to become veterans or wait for Veterans Day. Here in this community, Veterans Day is every day. And Active Duty Day is every day. And it's because of the 1% of the people who raised their hand to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that we can go into McDonald's here and not worry about a tomahawk falling on top of our heads.
You're making a good argument for universal service. That doesn't mean everybody has to put a uniform on. There are many ways to serve this country.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to call you Dan because I've known you for some time, and I appreciate our friendship over all the years, and you're concerned about my family, and I have the same concern for you. Thank you for coming and chatting with us this morning.
Thank you.
All right. You're listening to News Talk 640 WFNC.
This report is sponsored by Blindster.com.
Hi, I'm Kyle at Blindster.com.